Um, as you all know, equity mindedness is the linchpin of equity work. And Dr. Ben Simone gave us this concept of equity mindedness more than 2 decades, has articulated some key elements, notably that equity mindedness is about being race conscious. It's about viewing equity and student outcomes as a matter of institutional responsibility and accountability. It's about enacting efforts to intentionally affirm minoritized students and their racial identities. And it's about consistently and critically reflecting on who we are and what we do as educators and how our efforts either help to close equity gaps or allow them to persist. And in today's webinar, we will demonstrate that a necessary precondition to enacting equity mindedness is caring. And not just caring in a casual sense, but caring deeply and personally about students, about their lives, their well-being, and of course, their success. In other words, we need to see student success as a reflection of who we are and our effectiveness as educators, and we have to be personally invested. And of course, COVID-19 has required us to think even more deeply about what it means to be an equity-minded educator. As many of you know, the pandemic has had a disproportionate effect on communities of color, and therefore our efforts to serve students in this context means that we have to be racially conscious, but also pay special attention to digital equity. And what this means is that students have to have the opportunity to fully participate in virtual learning spaces, be it for their classes or to access student services. And this goes beyond just making sure that students have access to a computer and broadband, although no one would question that that is undeniably important at this time. But it also means that students have to have the technological knowledge that they need to access these spaces, and perhaps most importantly, to make meaningful contributions within them. And so, given that background and that context, I'm not naive enough, I should say my colleagues and I are not naive enough to think that all of us that we really understand why we need to care about racial equity. Even some of us who see ourselves as equity champions and care about equity work, we don't always necessarily think about and care about racial equity. And in the introduction of their newly published book, From Equity Talk to Equity Talk to Equity Walk, Tia McNair, Estella Ben Simone, and Lindsay Malcolm Picue, they talk about the growing racial tensions and the deleterious effects that it has on us socially and personally. And there is no more clear evidence of this than the racialized traumas that have come to light just in the month of May alone. Be it the high-profile slayings of Black people by law enforcement or vigilantes, or situations like the one involving Amy Cooper, who flagrantly and falsely accused a Black man of attacking her because he asked her to obey the law by leashing her dog. Now, speaking personally, when I learned of these incidents, I found myself immediately triggered. For days, I found it hard to sleep, couldn't concentrate for more than a few minutes at a time, and I was also very anxious, and my motivation was much lower than usual. And William Smith describes this as racial battle fatigue and likens it to what soldiers experience from being in environments where the risk of being attacked or dying is always present. And while some of you may say, well, students don't have to worry about being attacked or killed on campus, they are constantly dealing with a different kind of threat. The threat of having their intelligence, their sense of belonging, and their identities challenged on the basis of white supremacy. And we see this manifest in the three most consistent racial microaggressions that people of color face in educational environments. One is an assumption of criminality, where people of color, especially men of color, are assumed to be dangerous, thugs, and criminals, thereby making it socially acceptable to say that one fears them. Second is an ascription of intelligence, where people of color are assumed to be dumb, stupid, and not capable of learning. And third, there's pathologizing culture, where it is assumed that people of color come from families and communities that don't value education. And so we need to care about racial equity, not only because it's the right thing to do, but because our students are exposed to chronic racism and chronically racist environments on a consistent basis. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Wood, who's going to talk to us about some research findings and what they tell us about the